Today, we're told that the true identity of the so-called African American can be found in West Africa. But in today's video, I'll be showing you how the true identity and origins of the so-called African American can be found right here in the Americas. If you appreciate the content, leave a like, comment, and subscribe if you haven't already. We're taught that the so-called African American is only in America because of slavery. But if we put our feelings aside and actually do the research, we'll see that there's archaeologists and anthropologists and other types of scientists who says otherwise, that the so-called Negro or African American is actually an aborigine of America. Starting off, we're finna take a look into this book titled Primitive Man in Ohio by Warren K. Moorhead, and this is from 1892 if I'm not mistaken. And according to Wikipedia, the author isn't just anyone. Thanks to his research and work, he's been dubbed the Dean of American Archaeology. We cannot overlook the fact that the crania and skeletons examined by us, many of them excavated by our own hands, approach somewhat the Negro in their anatomical characteristics. They are those of a so-called inferior race with strong meso and brachycephalic affinities. Why would he call this race of people inferior? Moving on. None of the characteristics of the Mongolian or Mongoloid types, aka Asiatic types, are present in any of the Ohio crania which we have examined. They are evidently those of a people whose racial type was created and fixed on the American continent. In other words, the American race. What is this saying, you may be asking? Within the Ohio mounds, they found a Negro-like race. The race didn't have any Asiatic or Mongoloid features like today's Native Americans. The archaeologist goes on to say these are of a people whose race was evidently created on the American continent. In other words, they are the American race. To corroborate what I just read last, we're going to look at this research article from December 12th of 2005. And you can see the link next to the date at the bottom. Cranial morphology of early Americans from Lagoa Santa, Brazil. Implications for the settlement of the New World. I know we just went from Ohio to Brazil, but the subject matter is the same. The subject matter being who the first Americans are. Comparative morphological studies of the earliest human skeletons of the New World have shown that whereas late prehistoric, recent, and present Native Americans tend to exhibit a cranial morphology similar to late and modern Northern Asians, being short and wide neurocrania, high or orthognatic broad faces, and relatively high and narrow orbits and noses. The earliest South Americans tend to be more similar to present Australians, Melanesians, and Sub-Saharan Africans, being narrow and long neurocrania, prognatic low faces, and relatively low and broad orbits and noses. So they're letting you know, using more scientific words obviously, that the earliest South Americans were Negroid, while modern South Americans are Mongoloid. However, most of the previous studies of early American human remains were based on small cranial samples. Herein we compare the largest sample of early American skulls ever studied, 81 skulls of the Lagoa Santa region, with worldwide data sets representing global morphological variation in humans through 3 different multivariate analyses. The results obtained from all multivariate analysis confirm a close morphological affinity, meaning they look the same, between South American Paleo-Indians and extant Australo-Melanesian groups. Extant means still living, supporting the hypothesis that 2 distinct biological populations could have colonized the New World in a Pleistocene/Holocene transition. So now we have scientific proof saying that there was a Negroid group here in America in pre-Columbian times, far before Columbus times. They're calling them Paleo-Indians because they were before the Indians. Remember, today Indians are the people that's on reservations, the so-called Native Americans. The Paleo Indians would be the people that were before them, not their ancestors, because their ancestors are Paleo-Siberians.
Scientists today can tell precisely when they arrived and from where. All native peoples in South and North America belong to a racial type known as Mongoloid. They're descended from the ancient peoples of Siberia. During the Ice Age, 12,000 years ago, there was a land bridge between Siberia and Alaska. Mongoloid peoples were the first to enter the New World, or so experts thought. The Brazilian finds point to a very different story of the discovery of the Americas. Paintings on these rock shelters are much older than the Indians. Here, hunters chased giant armadillos, an animal that flourished during the Ice Age, long before the arrival of the Indians. There's a playful feel to many of the scenes. Here, a group of men are standing on each other's shoulders, just like a circus act. And here, a rare romantic moment. The Brazilian finds show that the New World was discovered tens of thousands of years earlier than previously believed, certainly well before the time of the American Indians. But who were these pioneers? A much earlier wave of Mongoloids, or another race altogether? Clues to the identity of the first Americans are emerging in rock shelters in the northeast and southeast of Brazil. Archaeologists there have recently unearthed human remains. Prehistoric skulls were found buried in layers of soil 9,000 to 12,000 years old. They are the oldest skulls in the Americas. And this is the oldest of them all. The skull of a young woman nicknamed Luthia by scientists. Can she tell us who the first Americans were? Walter Neves is a physical anthropologist at Sao Paulo University in Brazil. He has been using a standard and reliable archaeological measure, the shape of the skull, to find out what race she belonged to.
91.
He fully expected Luthia to be a Mongoloid, an ancestor of the American Indians.
91.
But then he fed the measurements into the computer.
When we start running the computer and seeing the results, it was amazing because we realized that the statistics, the quantitative analysis we were doing was not showing just people to be Mongoloid. In fact, the analysis was showing just people as anything except Mongoloid.
So who was Luthia? And where did she come from? To find out, the skull was taken to a hospital in Rio de Janeiro to begin the process of reconstructing her face. The first stage was to make a three-dimensional CAT scan of Luthia's skull in order to build a replica. cast was then given to Richard Neve of the University of Manchester in England, one of the world's leading forensic artists, to recreate her features.
That, to me, is a Negroid face that has all the features that you associate with a Negroid face. The proportions of the face, it doesn't say anything about it being Mongoloid.
Luthia belongs to a race found historically along the rim of the Indian Ocean, in East Africa, in the islands of South Asia, and in Australia and Melanesia. Was this then the face of a first American? Her reconstruction is confirmed by measurements Walter Nevis has taken of all his skulls.
The first reaction was not to believe in it. But as the results, repeated so many times, and the result is exactly the same thing. They are very similar to nowadays Aborigines and Africans, and no similarity at all with Mongoloids in Asia or with American Indians.
I want to show you this post from the Washington Post before I move forward. It says colonial remains reclassified as African American. Jamestown skeletons once thought to be Indians. Smithsonian Institution scientists have discovered that 4 skeletons dug up decades ago at colonial Jamestown are among the oldest known remains of so-called African Americans. The bones, thought to date between 1650 and 1700, were originally classified as American Indian. They reclassified these bones exactly how Walter Plecker reclassified a whole tribe of Virginia Indians. My point is, today, yes, you're being called Black or African American, but that's all a part of their plan. They reclassified us many a times. Even in our death, they reclassify us. Now, I'm sure we all familiar with Frederick Douglass, but this is what you get from a quick Google search. It says Frederick Douglass was an African American, hold on to that, social reformer, abolitionist, orator, writer, etc. I want y'all to hold on to the fact that they called him an African American. Let's see what Frederick Douglass had to say about our identity in his paper, dated January 22nd of 1852. There is no sentiment more universally entertained, nor more firmly held by the free colored people of the United States than that this is their own, their native land, and that here, for good or for evil, their destiny is to be wrought out. Identified with the entire history of the American people, going back more than 200 years, this sentiment is natural and praiseworthy. There is not now, there never has been, and we think there never will be any general desire on the part of our people, being the colored people, to immigrate from this land to any other, and least of all, to the wilds of Africa. Please note that he wrote this in response to the American Colonization Society's attempt at colonizing West Africa with free colored people of America. Why would he be saying that we're identified with the entire history of the American people? He also went on to say that this is our own native land, and that sentiment of feeling like that this is our native land is praiseworthy. Let's take a look at this newspaper article from a couple years after Frederick Douglass's death. The ancestry of Frederick Douglass, the noted colored orator and politician who died several years ago, has been discussed much of late. Miss Caroline Dahl of Washington says Douglas once told her his mother was a Potomac Indian and his father a white man. That alone makes him not African American. Lewis H. Douglas, a son of Frederick Douglass, says, "From all the evidence gathered by observation and inquiry, my grandmother on my father's side, Frederick Douglass's mother, had no visible admixture by color with the white race. Her children, with the exception of my father, were black. Douglas was a mulatto." We are not African American. They just do not want us to be American. That's why they call us black, Negro, anything but American.